Good morning.
Good morning.
Brought some acorns from my street here in just a minute, or sometime while I'm speaking. I will be talking about an acorn, and if you haven't seen an acorn lately, they have this little cap on them. And I learned that they're on the interwebs, you can actually, there's a six-step process to growing your own oak tree, and how to soak an acorn, and that you take off the cap and you soak it, and it goes upside down, and this little tendril comes out, and then you poke it in the ground, and then in 100 years you have an oak tree. So actually it's like 15 years, 5 to 15 years, but an oak tree can live over 200 years. Anybody have an oak tree in their yard? I grew up with pin oak trees in my yard in Millville. When President Obama or any president gets to the end of their 4-year term or 8-year term, and there's an election day, between October or November and January, what do we call that? The lame duck session. Well, I feel that we are currently in summer's lame duck session. Summer gets, fall doesn't start until Friday, the 22nd. Well, we've already pumpkin spiced everything. Already out there. Some of us are wearing sweaters already and changed over to our browns and oranges. Some of us are wearing shorts still. Good for you. Summer's happy with you. But we've given up on summer. We go back to school. We talk about fall. Fall is here. I've already seen memes on Facebook of 95 days till Christmas. I think now we're on day 94 till Christmas. And summer is still here. We are present in summer. Don't give up on it until Thursday night at midnight, okay? So whatever you can do. Today is a beautiful summer day. And it's not a fall day. Today is a summer day. And likewise, fall has an even worse lame duck session, because guess when fall ends? December 20th. We don't have winter until December 21st. So fall lasts all the way up until the week of Christmas, but who thinks of that, right? And then you don't keep your pumpkin out until the middle of December. We start putting up Christmas stuff like Friday. Right? This Friday. And the reason I'm thinking about all that is because I was outside looking at my front yard, and I usually put wreaths on my door that go with the season. Okay? And I thought, well, it's time. I didn't put a summer one on. It's time for me to put a fall one on. But I am one of those people that doesn't play Christmas music until November 1st, or after Thanksgiving. I don't play Christmas music until the day after Thanksgiving. Yeah. And so I will not put a pumpkin on my porch or a mum or a fall wreath until this Friday. And if you drive by my house, if I do it before Friday, you can call me a liar. But I will not do it. There's something about beginnings, middles, and ends. What is right? What is due? Right? I mean, summer is here. I'm not going to do anything until Friday. But Friday I'll go to Meijer and buy a mom for $7.99 and get a pumpkin. And anybody else in here enjoy decorating their porch or house? Anybody already have mums and pumpkins out? Turn your chair around. I don't want to see your face the rest of this sermon. Okay. Well, with pumpkins become pumpkin seeds. Okay, I love to roast them, love to suck on them, that salty taste. My niece is 3, and she actually likes pumpkin seeds as a snack, like year-round. And I babysat her, or kidsat her, about a month ago, and her mom sent her in my car with like a Sam's Club size of pumpkin seeds. And we stopped at a red light, and all of them landed on my floor, and that's a lot of pumpkin seeds. And I still have them in there. So if you want any pumpkin seeds, you can come to my car after church. But I love to eat them. Now, I also know, I saw a picture of a dog that likes to eat pumpkin seeds, and then he, what happens when dogs eat? They have to go to the restroom. And there was a picture of a house that there were pumpkins all over the yard that had grown because pumpkins come from pumpkin seeds, right? I mean, it's just natural thing of life. So with acorns are small and they're mighty, and if you saw the movie The Nut Job, maybe, their acorns can be ridden around like skis or like a snowmobile, but if you're the size of a squirrel. But anyway, these crunch under your feet, but an oak tree gives off hundreds of these. And if you have one in your yard, acorns can be annoying. But acorns can also be beautiful, because out of this small thing, if you think about it, wrap your mind around it, becomes a mighty oak. Out of this small little acorn, just one. It doesn't have to be all the hundreds that are laying around the tree, just one of them has to take, just one. And so it is with our lives. That the seeds that are planted in us, it just takes one. It just takes one to grow something beautiful in your life. We are going to talk today about, and Cheryl, thank you for reading that scripture so beautifully, from the book of John. This chapter in the book of John in 12 is actually Jesus' last hurrah, his last big speech, his last discourse, if you will, before he is crucified, because this takes place during the week of the Passion Week, and he's eventually going to be crucified and buried. And this is his prediction. When he talks about the wheat, the kernel of wheat going into the ground, he's predicting his own death. Now, it takes longer than 3 days for a wheat seed or wheat kernel to grow into a beautiful wheat field, or an acorn, it takes longer than 3 days to grow into a tree. But this was an analogy or a metaphor, if you will, about how he will die and be buried and then rise again. Very simple, but it is the core of our existence. And there are many theologians that actually believe John 12 and this particular verse is the epitome of who we are as Christians. And in this chapter, Greeks have shown up. Any of you Greek in here? Well, Greeks are inquisitive people, evidently. And Greeks had come into town, and it's thought that these were actually Jews that were in the diaspora, that they had been sent out hundreds of years before, or expelled out of Israel, if you will, into the surrounding Mediterranean countries, Babylon, Assyria, and some others, and that they have actually made their way back to Jerusalem, and they have heard of this man named Jesus. And it says earlier in this chapter, there were some Greeks in town who had come to worship at the feast, Passover. They approached Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee. "Sir, we want to see Jesus. Can you help us?" Philip went and told Andrew, and Andrew and Philip together told Jesus. And Jesus answered, "My time's up. I'm reading from the Message. The time has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Listen carefully. Unless a grain of wheat is buried in the ground, dead to the world, it is never any more than a grain of wheat. But unless it is buried, it sprouts and reproduces itself many times over. In the same way, anyone who holds on to their life just as it is destroys that life." Anyone who holds on to their life just as it is destroys that life. But if you let it go, reckless in your love, you'll have it forever, real and eternal. I love that. I don't think Jesus is saying that everything in our life needs to be destroyed. I think Jesus is asking us to look at our lives and what is it in our life currently that we can change, let go of, sacrifice for the greater good. Because the epitome of the gospel, once again, Jesus is predicting his own death, that unless a grain of wheat is buried in the ground, unless an acorn is buried in the ground and grows up a tree, or a pumpkin seed grows a pumpkin. Tomatoes, anybody grow tomatoes? Okay. Anything else? And unless, I just cleaned out a drawer. Anybody have a junk drawer at their house? Okay. No? You don't? Okay. Well, I was cleaning out my junk drawer just a couple weeks ago, and I had 2 packets of seeds from the Crone Conservatory. If you go to their butterfly show, they'll give you seed packets, and they were from 2012. And now, that might tell you how long it is since I cleaned out my junk drawer. But I thought, oh, how sad, these seeds lost their chance. I sort of, they stayed in this packet, and they're just dry now. There's nothing. Nothing in there. I, gave them no opportunity to plant, be watered, be sustained, and grow and produce. I did grow a garden a few years ago, and for the first time, and I planted watermelon seeds. Anybody plant watermelons? And it didn't grow, and I was really sad about that. And because the watermelon was my favorite thing. I had some strawberries, and I tried some green beans. And I was telling everybody about how the watermelon seeds were just nothing, got in a bad batch. And then I was mowing my grass one day, and I realized they had grown up in my tree, and they were hanging down like coconuts. Yeah. So sometimes when we plant things, picture that if you will. Sometimes when we plant things, they come out differently than we expected. So not everything in your life that you plant, anybody ever have anything not go right? And it comes out different, but maybe it's even better? A grain of wheat must die. Unless Jesus had died the way he did, would you and I be sitting here today? You can actually debate that. God, I don't think that God, we can't limit God to one option. But I think that Jesus was his best option. He created him, and it was we have to believe, I'm not a parent in my life. I have a dog and a cat. But to sacrifice your own son would be something that I just couldn't be able to do. So I know that the option that he chose was probably, it was a horrible one. It was a vulnerable one for God to do, to sacrifice his son. Jesus had to die for our sins to atone for them, but perhaps there was another way. But the way that was chosen was the way that is the way it happened. So we today can look back, especially on Easter, during the Easter season, and during the Lenten season, when we're looking before Easter about what we can give up. How many of you give up things for Lent? How many of you take on things for Lent? Yes, that's shifted in the last few decades, at least around here in these parts. Instead of just giving up something, you take something on. Jesus gave up everything, and he was telling, and the disciples, he had told them over and over, and many different people, all the way in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. He had said it over and over, and they did not get it, that he was going to die and rise again. He was going to die and rise again. And this was his last hurrah. This is his last this is my example. Unless a grain of wheat is buried in the ground, and it says in the message, dead to the world, it is never any more than a grain of wheat. In the same way, anyone who holds on to their life just as it is destroys that life. But if you let it go, and I'm not going to sing from the movie Frozen, but reckless in your love, you'll have it forever, real and eternal. I went to Fuller Seminary out in Los Angeles, and in the fall of 1993 is when I showed up there, and I'll tell you how old I am. But there was a professor there that had, the school opened in 1947, and he actually had been teaching there since around then, 1947, and they brought him up to the platform, and he spoke at every student orientation, and he had a walker, and his name was Ian Pitt Watson, and he's actually a very famous homiletics professor. I was going to try to say that in a fancy way. Preaching professor. And he preached this verse. And come to find out, he preached that verse. They brought him every year to preach that to every incoming seminary class. And he preached that sermon for 40 years. And his point was that you came to seminary thinking that you're going to be something, or that you're going to study to be a minister. And I want you to realize that you're going to die to yourself every day. The things, you may not get an A on every paper here. Every sermon that you preach, you're not always going to get good grades on that. You may not know everything. You came from a church where maybe you were the star and you knew all the Bible trivia, and here you're going to be lost. You're going to be challenged with other people from other denominations that just aren't UCC. Did you know there are Presbyterians out there? And Nazarenes? Did you know that? That there are people with different viewpoints from around the world. And that unless you die to yourself every day in your life and in your ministry, you will not prosper. or produce. And he's not talking about churches of 5,000 people. It's producing loving relationships, even with yourself. And I still remember that sermon. And he actually wrote it up in a little pamphlet. And I'm glad that Fuller had him do that every year. But letting go is not easy. Letting go, allowing yourself, whatever it is in your life that you need to bury and let go of, so that in the end it can produce much fruit. Because if Jesus had not died the way he did it for the greater good of all. He did it for you and for me. It's sort of elementary in our Christian faith. Jesus died, he rose again, so that you and I could live and have our life. But how does that impact you on a daily basis? How does the life of Christ really impact you? Are you an angry person? Do you keep a scorecard of wrongs? Are you continually overwhelmed with everything in your life? And praying does not come to your mind instead of complaining does? How does your faith, how does the fact that Jesus died and rose again and lived his life so that you and I can have eternal life, how does it affect your daily life? Very simple question, but yet a difficult answer. And that's what grace is about. We can pick ourselves up and forgive ourselves, and with God's grace, and ask him or her to help us to live lives of deeper meaning. Jesus is clearly predicting his own death here, but I'm asking us today to ask ourselves, to inquire upon ourselves, what inside of you needs to die? What do you need to let go of? And even as a congregation, as Nexus, is there something that needs to die so that you can make room for more growth? That needs to be pruned so that there can be room for more growth? And I don't know that answer, and you may not know that answer. I know the church council is probably working on that on a constant basis. And, many of us have relationships that need to die. That sounds really abrupt. And I'm not just talking about love relationships, but friendships that are toxic. Anybody have those? Or we need to shift our minds around. The manager at our work that seems to hate herself, and because of that, she makes your life miserable at work. And maybe dying to your, and I have that in my own life, dying to my view of her and starting again, resetting, the reset button. Can I let go of what I've thought of her in the past or my expectations of her and see her in a new light? See her as through the light or lens of love. Some of us have big things that need to die. I am 46 now, and I'll be very vulnerable with you. I wanted to have kids. I wanted to biologically have a child. And that ship has pretty much sailed for me.
Still have.
Well, not for me. So anyway, I've had to grieve that. That's my story. And some of us not. But for me, though, what does that mean for my life? And how can I make room for other people or other children? Do I be a foster mother? Am I a better aunt and uncle? But also, did I shift my life? What does that mean now that I can make room for something else? That's just one example. Some of us have an addiction that nobody even knows about, that we need to let die so that we can make room for some healthy living. Jesus died so that you and I can be free and happy. When was the last time you allowed yourself to be happy? That you did nothing and you didn't feel guilty about it? That you enjoyed this life? You really enjoyed it? Because unless we allow those things in our life that keep us from really being in tune with God, unless we allow ourselves to become as grains of wheat, grains of an acorn, grains of whatever you need to let go of. I asked the questions this morning, what inside of you needs to die? what is a current situation you're working on of letting go, but how is your faith influencing that decision? And how easy is it for you to sacrifice for the greater good? How easy is it for you to sacrifice for your partner, or your spouse, or your children? It's time for us to rise up in our lives and be people that say, unless I'm willing to let something die to make room for something better, I'm not going to truly live. And that's sort of a harsh thing to say, maybe, or to think about today. But how can you sacrifice for the greater good? Even if you're 14 or 15 or 19 or 91. How can you sacrifice for your partner? I want to pray for us today and remember that for such a time as this, you are called to be the best you that you can be. You are called to be a follower of Christ in a way that you never have been before. And I think this world right now, when I think of a current person that probably had to let go of something to make room for something else, and I'm not here to preach politics today, and I'm not here, I don't know if you voted Republican or Libertarian or Democrat in the last election, but I think of Hillary Clinton today in this, that she has been our First Lady, she was a Senator, she was our Secretary of State, and no matter what you thought of her or what you think of her, she's not a perfect person. I'm not a perfect person. She did want to be our president. And she wanted to be our president the last time with President Obama, and she had to give that up. She had to sacrifice that and allow another person to her place. And then she got to this new place where she thought that she was going to be our president, or that she thought she'd be the first woman president. And that didn't happen for her. And I think in this new book that she has out, whether you read it or not, and whether you agree with her or not, one thing that we can say, or at least give her, is that she has to shift her life now. She has to let that die, that dream of being president, that dream of being the leader, the first woman president, and to make room in her life for something else. Now, I know that she said that she's going to be with Howard Dean, and they formed this nonprofit to help younger people, or help other people that want to come up in politics. She's giving more time to being a grandmother, and those kind of things that she wouldn't have had time for otherwise. Because sometimes when we allow ourselves to die, when we allow something to die, something comes along that's better that we couldn't see. And I wanted to open it up today, as we close here. I want to say a prayer for you, but is the microphone ready here for our questions? About what is something in your life right now that you are having to work on letting go, that you'd be willing to share, and how is your faith influencing that? And I want to pray. Well, I guess my microphone's on. God, I pray for everyone here today that, first of all, we would be vulnerable people, that we would realize unless we allow a part of ourselves to die daily to you, that perhaps we won't fully be used by you or utilized by you. And God, I know you're not asking for us to give up our hopes and dreams in a way that would crush our spirits or bring harm to our lives, but you're asking us to sacrifice and give up those dreams that maybe are not beneficial to us any longer. Those things that we need to let go of to make room for something beautiful and good and deep and true. And God, we do thank you that you sent your Son, Jesus Christ, to die, to rise again, to show us about unconditional love, to be the epitome of peace. Because God, what I really ask for my brothers and sisters is that peace would come into our lives. This world needs peace. This world needs you. And in order for us to tell others about you, we need to make room in our own lives for you. And so God, just as an acorn is buried deep in the ground, and a mighty oak grows with roots that are deep, make us strong for you. May we grow deep in you and up towards you, just like a tree reaches toward you in the heavens. God, I pray also that we would be a loving people. May this congregation know what it needs to give up in the years to come and what it needs to take on. And God, may we always be an Easter people. I thank you for the season of summer. I thank you for the season of fall and winter and spring. And what I do know about those seasons is that as every season has growth, every season has things that have to die to make room for new. But in the midst of all that, your love is unconditional. Great is thy faithfulness, O God, my Father. In Jesus' name, amen.